see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
What unites people? Armies, gold, flags, stories. There's nothing in the world more powerful than a good story. Nothing can stop it.
If you want to stand out from everybody else, you need to get into storytelling.
Draw a different frame around the same set of circumstances and new pathways come into view.
Welcome to ARTEFACTLive with me, Scott MacArthur, where we look at the art and science of story. We don't care who you are, whether you're a bricklayer, a professor or a speaker, all we care about is you being a good storyteller.
Thank God the drummers arrived.
It's time to realise that facts tell, but it's stories that sell.
Get me some nasty and get it now or someone's getting shot.
And that's a niche of a niche of a niche of a niche of a 1,000 comments.
Selling a hemorrhoid cream to someone who's got hemorrhoids.
Got a whip.
I was born into a deep contradiction.
This stuff's magic.
God, that's so clever.
Good afternoon and welcome to ARTEFACTLive with me, Scott MacArthur, where we look at the art and science of storytelling. Well, thanks once again for tuning in. It was a good week last week. We had my first tune in from Brazil last week, which was terrific. So it's lovely to see, and I hope you're there again this week, either live or on replay. It was nice to see the tentacles of the show going out across the world. Well, let's just remember what we did last week. If you weren't with us, well, you missed a cracker. We focused on society and storytelling, and I had Tom Morley with me, the drummer, team builder, and member of Scrittability all those years ago. I only just remember Scrittability. He's older than me, but Tom was great. He's always good value. But what I particularly liked was when he tried to show us how you can use music or rhythm to demonstrate words or demonstrate emotions, and I thought that was really interesting, and it's got me thinking about some future shows that I've got coming up with other musicians. So yeah, it was a good show. I really enjoyed it. In terms of what's been happening this week, well, story's been everywhere, hasn't it? There's a lot going on. We've unfortunately got another COVID issue on the horizon by the looks of things, so I wonder if the government will deal with it in a different way, because as I've said before, bombarding people with these facts and figures, they're very important, but it's the stories that are going to help people change their behaviour. So let's hope we see a bit more in terms of storytelling this time around than we did last time, because it didn't work as well as it should have done. So this week, well, I hope you like the title this week. I think it's a really interesting title. I'm going to flash it up again. Storytelling in war, or war and storytelling. Gosh, when I was talking to Joe about this, we weren't sure about what to call the show. We were talking about calling it conflict and storytelling or something else. And then Joe said, look, I like war and storytelling. And you know what? So do I. So I don't like war, but I like the two things together, because Joe's work is about using storytelling to try and help heal some of the terrible wounds that have happened during conflict in the world. So let me just get Joe right on right now. Here we are, Joe. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. I'm really happy to be with you today.
Excellent. That's a good start. I once had a guest who had a big problem at work, and he said, I'm pleased to be here, because he was obviously stressed about something else. So thanks for coming on, Joe. It's an absolute pleasure. And tell me about the title. Where, it's such an unusual and powerful title for our show this week. Where did that all come from? How did you get to that particular focus for your work?
It's very strange. As of late, well, probably early teenager, I remember seeing horrific pictures on my telly of Vietnam and the conflict in Northern Ireland, and I remember just wanting war to stop. It was something that I really cared about.
Yes.
And I mean, a lot of teenagers have these ideas about wanting to stop things. Mine was
Yeah.
war.
Yeah.
But then in my 20s, something happened to me which gave me a direction and focus, because I felt the pain of war. My father was killed in a terrorist attack when I was 27. And I remember the shock, the horror, the pain, the devastation, but also the feeling that I'm now part of a war. I can feel some of the pain of war because a bomb has gone off, and it was the Brighton bomb, the Grand Hotel. In Brighton, my father was a politician, and he was killed. And it wasn't just losing my father, who I adored and was very close to, but it was also the me that felt I lived in peacetime. That went away because now I'm part of a war, and so that was decades ago, 84.
Yes.
My maths is so bad, but it's a long time. And ever since then, my focus has been, how can we change the world so people don't blow each other up? Because the pain is too great. I wouldn't want anyone else to go through what my family went through. And as we know, the families have suffered far more than my family have around the world. There's so much suffering from war and violence.
Yes.
So that's sort of been my focus.
My condolences for that, and I remember it. I was actually in first year at university when that happened.
You don't look old enough.
Thank you. Well, that's a first on this show. But I was, and I remember it being shocking. I remember everybody being shocked because during that period there was quite a lot of political unrest, and at that time I was a card-holding member of Militant and Socialist Worker, and so you weren't too keen on Thatcher. Yeah, and but I remember the reality of it hitting us right between the eyes. It was like, oh, and all the politics just disappeared because people were dying. It was awful. So I do remember it. But how did you then? What age were you? You were 14, I think, were you? Or
no, 27.
27. Sorry. How did you? What was the journey from that terrible day? I mean, obviously you have a period of questioning and mourning, but what happened then that took you to the career you have developed? How did that develop?
Well, it was only 2 days later that I made a commitment to not have an enemy and bring something positive out of it and turn it around. So very early on, and I actually travelled to Belfast in 85.
Right.
And in 85, Belfast was a war zone.
Yeah.
British tanks everywhere, British soldiers. And I gave my first talk, it would have been in 85, and to like 1,000 people. And these were born again Christians. So Catholics and Protestants who should have been on different sides came together through their faith. And I gave a talk. I'll never forget it. I was terrified, absolutely terrified. But then in those days, I would very easily talk about forgiveness and make it seem quite easy. Some of the more difficult bits came later. So the focus was there, and going to Belfast and meeting people who could have been my other and hearing their stories. And that's when I realized the power of stories, that it rehumanized people. People became human. And that idea of hearing stories was there very early on. And it seemed to me every time I met someone who represented my other and heard their story and saw them as human being, that somehow helped heal me and maybe something greater than me. So it was quite a risky thing to do.
Incredibly brave thing to do, Joe.
Maybe mad.
Yeah, well, maybe. But when you say just the language you use, if you forgive me, I'd like to. You say my other. Is that how? What do you mean by that? What's the frame?
So it's not. They weren't my other, but I represented a side of the conflict.
Right.
And it was a 3-sided conflict in Northern Ireland, the north of Ireland. And so I represented, I suppose, the English establishment. My father was a Conservative politician. So if I'd gone for the blaming route, I would have blamed the IRA, who were Catholics, who were working class Catholics.
Yeah.
So I was meeting working class Catholics in Belfast. Like I did keep myself safe, sort of. I wasn't sitting down with IRA at that time. I did meet someone actually very high in Sinn Féin, which is the political wing.
Yes.
But that was done with great secrecy.
Right.
But it was all about humanizing the other. And
Right. Okay.
our newspapers, you probably remember at the time, like they completely demonized the IRA.
Yes.
I mean, it was the words they used were just awful. And all the time in the 80s and the 90s, the government were actually having secret talks with the IRA. But the media coverage was, we don't speak to terrorists, they're evil. And that wasn't going to help me.
Yes.
So I had to sort of dig deeper to find the truth.
Gosh. I mean, I grew up near Glasgow, and at that time, and all through, I mean, I actually had my first birthday in Ireland as well, so I had some contact with it as a youngster, and then throughout my school years, there was, I mean, it was ridiculous. The hatred between, I mean, pseudo faiths, because most of them didn't believe in any one of the 3,000 gods, never mind the Catholic or the Protestant type. But there was hatred and confusion. And I remember once running home to my mum saying, Mummy, the Fenians are coming to get me. And I thought the Fenians were like space monsters. I had no idea what it was. I had no clue, but I'd been told, as you've just said, that there was them and there was us. There was them and then there was us, and those them were mad, crazy, dangerous. So yeah, I have some empathy from my own experience, and fortunately, it's not as bad now as it used to be. Certainly not in Glasgow. But can I? So yeah, all I'm only saying that because I think there's some empathy there for some of that experience, because I did grow up during it.
Oh, fascinating, yeah.
But you talk about humanizing. Can you just explain what you mean by that? Because I think I do understand it, but I'd like to hear your perspective, because I know other people see things in different ways. Joe, can you explain what you mean by humanizing through the storytelling?
Well, maybe we can go to the really important conversation I had.
Okay.
Because that's such an amazing illustration of seeing the humanity of someone who is my other. So back in 98, we finally had the Good Friday Agreement, and part of the agreement was that the people who were in prison for being political prisoners came out of prison. So Patrick McGee, who planted the bomb, which my father was killed, and 4 others, was released. And that's when I decided that I wanted to meet him. And I met people in Northern Ireland who knew him, and I knew he was committed to the peace process. So I went to meet him, and we just had the anniversary last week, 21 years ago. I actually had an event with him because I wanted to mark the fact that we've had 21 years of dialogue and friendship and trust. But back 21 years ago, I didn't know who he was. He didn't know who I was. I was terrified.
Yes.
And at that time, I realized that the people who've been involved in the struggle, they did it because they tried nonviolence and hadn't worked.
Yes.
So for them, violence was a response to how they saw it as the oppression and the suffering in their community.
Yes.
And I knew he'd come with a lot of political righteousness and certainty. So that, I was okay with that, because all I really wanted was to look in his eyes and see him as a human being, because, he was the most demonized terrorist. I use that word because that's the word that was used against him that we had.
Yes.
And that didn't help me. I wanted to see him as a human being, like the face behind the label. So when he arrived, my purpose was to really listen to him and really understand him and hear his story and ask him questions. And it wasn't to get an apology. And I remember a point where he's talking about the suffering of his community, of what he saw. And I just saw how much he cared. He was someone, yes, he planted that bomb, but he also cared for people. And so that brings back the real person, humanity, because people are never just defined by one action or maybe many actions. We're all more than what we've done.
Yes.
And when I saw that humanity, he actually himself had a moment of complete transformation, where he stopped talking about the sort of political justification and started talking about himself and wanted to know about my dad.
Right.
Because this is another part of conflict. Like when he planted that bomb, he saw no one in the hotel. They were all demonized. They were legitimate target, a means to an end.
Yes.
And he's now seeing my dad as a human being. So my dad is being humanized through Patrick asking me questions about my dad and realizing that some of the qualities he saw in me must have come from my dad.
Yes.
So there's rehumanization going on all sides. And, Patrick would later say that he was disarmed by my empathy. And if I'd gone in there going, I'm right, you're wrong, you're bad, I'm good. That, the kind of, I'm not even going to call it childish because it's not childish, is what we do as adults, isn't it?
Yes.
Confronting and blaming, he would have stayed in a very safe place of righteousness. So he opened up.
Oh gosh. That first moment when you walked into the room, was he in the room or did he walk in?
He walked in. I was in someone's kitchen. This is not a prepared environment. This is just a friend's house.
Okay. So that's amazing. Did your heart miss a beat or was it?
Yeah, I was terrified.
I can't relate to it. I have empathy with the Protestant Catholic thing, but I can't relate to that. So, I absolutely incredible. And so, did you then go to him, or did he come to you, or how did it work?
Well, I asked him to meet me. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
It had to come from me. He never would have asked to meet anyone. It had to come from me.
Okay.
And it took a long time because I kept on hearing he didn't want to meet me, but then that wasn't true. He always said he would meet me. So it was complicated. And eventually we met. And I think for both of us, we knew once was not enough. We started something together and we needed to carry on. Right. And so there was a second meeting and then a third meeting. Right. And then that carried on and it was filmed for a documentary.
Was it? Really?
Yeah.
What was that called?
Facing the Enemy.
Right.
It's actually now on Vimeo. It comes on and off Vimeo. I don't understand Vimeo, but it's now on there now and it's free. I can send you the link.
That's okay. I've got a note of it. I just had a look at it there. Yes.
Okay. So it's got my married name on it, which I wish it didn't, but there we go.
No. Is that your married name? Is that the right one? Okay. Thank you. Well, I'll put that in the show notes, Joe, if people might be interested to watch it, if you don't mind.
It's an amazing film and a portrayal of some of our early meetings and some of the struggles we both had, I think. Right.
And how did you then go from those struggles to actually, and I'm just giving you my impression of reading your website and things. There's obviously agency in that relationship. You saw something that you could do with that relationship. Is that what happened, or did things just happen organically, or what happened?
It was very organic at the beginning. The first time we were asked to speak was an event in London, and we had maybe 4 minutes each. And that was the time Patrick said, I now know I could have sat down and had a cup of tea with Joe's dad. Now, the cup of tea for me is sort of a metaphor of sitting down with respect and dignity, and and the Conservative government didn't have a policy of cups of tea with terrorists, or even now, it's not part of their policies. Yes. But that is, to me, a cup of tea is like a form of non-violence, and I can imagine the two of them sitting together. And after that, people came up and said, just seeing the two of us together was something they were never going to forget. Right. Because we should be enemies. And yet there we were, trusting each other, speaking, listening with respect. And that had an impact on other people. And I think that's when I began to realize that whatever was going on with me and Patrick, when we shared in public, it was going to be a contribution to a new form of post-conflict healing in Northern Ireland. I mean, at first I just saw it in the context of these islands, but then it grew. But, the first couple of years, probably I was just seeing it as this is my contribution to the peace process.
Yes. Wow. So then that took you both outside this country, didn't it? You've done. Could you tell us some of the experiences that you've had in taking that out with the country?
We've had so many now.
Right.
Funny, during the talk last week, Patrick said we've spoken together 200 times on different platforms, and I said it's 400, but we're going to have to disagree. So well, who knows? So usually we responded, but there was a lot of people we knew in Palestine and Israel who we met in different conferences in different parts of Europe and also in England, who were very involved in doing incredible peace building work and very much the rehumanizing each other through storytelling.
Yeah.
So I got some funding for us to go to Palestine and Israel for like 10 days. And I remember the first time we spoke, it was in part of Jerusalem where it's one of the easiest places for Israelis and Palestinians to meet. It was like a neutral place. And this group was called Combatants for Peace. And when the Palestinians arrived, they'd all had difficulty getting there. They'd been stopped by the Israeli police. It'd taken them hours, and the Israelis just sort of walked in and it was fine. And I think I realized the hugeness, the vastness of the conflict. And I had a thought of, what are we doing here? Like, how can we give anything to what's happening here? And then during the talk, they asked us, they said, can you give us your solutions for our conflict? And both Patrick and I went, nope, we're here to share our story.
Yes.
And what happened was that they took our story and had a whole conversation after we'd finished. And one of them said to me, there's two things I've got from you coming here. One is the fact you're here shows that you care, and that matters to us. And two, we're seeing our conflict mirrored back in a different way. And that was really powerful.
And oh gosh, and where has that gone? Are you still working there, or where has your contribution gone to?
Well, I'm in touch with some of the people. They pop up on Facebook and say, hi, how are you? I'm aware of the work that's going on there. Also, Palestinian Israelis, bereaved families meet, who are incredible. So once I've been to a country, I stay in touch with the people that I meet, definitely, because they feel like family.
Yes. Wow. And what's been the most, I guess, complex or difficult environment that you've spoken in? I didn't prep you for that, sorry.
Well, we've had a riot outside our talk.
Have you?
Right. Yeah, that was in Belfast. Right. But actually, the one that I want to talk to you about stories was we went to Rwanda.
Right.
And Rwanda is very, very, very complex. And I remember I also do workshops, and I was there with an amazing woman, Marina Cantacuzino, from the Forgiveness Project.
Yeah, I interviewed her a couple of weeks ago, believe it or not.
Oh, yeah, I think I did know.
Yeah.
So we were doing this workshop together, and there was an amazing woman there with a baby, breastfeeding her baby. She didn't speak any English. And I remember the next morning she sat down next to me and she looked at me and she put her hand on my leg. And then she called a translator and said, now I know I'm not alone.
Gosh.
Solidarity. I thought it was just us. And
she just
beamed. I know. She just beamed at me, know, and what we exchanged then is two women, two sisters from very different conflicts. And I would not put mine on the same level as hers. Obviously, mine's one off. And in some ways, I'm very, very lucky when it comes to what people experience from genocide and war. So worse experiences. I've met many people. But in that moment, we were like together in solidarity. And across race, across barriers, across everything. And she'd shared her story. And that, to me, is the power of stories. So it can give people a sense that they're not alone. There's hope. There are things that they can do.
Yes.
And when people are on their own with the trauma of war or genocide or terrorism, it can be very overwhelming and very, very isolating.
Yes, yes. God, you really genuinely gave me goosebumps there. That's phenomenal. I remember, and it's over there. I can see it from where I'm sitting. When my grandfather was alive, he fought like many of our grandfathers and grandmothers in the Second World War. And what happened with him was that he was on a submarine, a Polish submarine that got sank, and he was one of the 3 people that survived that particular sinking. In fact, they made a film called Operation Crossbow about it, because he was in the Scottish, the SAS, but the naval version, the boat service, and he was then rescued by a German U-boat, and he was a prisoner of war. But the German soldier who took him out of the water actually gave my grandfather his service medal, because they were both dads with 4 or 5 kids in working class, one in Berlin, one in Glasgow. They were much more in common than they had apart, and that had a massive impact on my grandfather, and he became, a very different man following that. So these stories, I tell you that story because when I heard your story, it genuinely gave me goosebumps, and I wonder why we don't hear more of these stories, because I know they're there. I know real people are not politicians, and even politicians are real people. There's a side to it that you do wonder why, and I don't know if you've got a view on this. Why aren't the stories more often told? Because this phrase, I think it might have been you actually, story healing rather than storytelling. When I heard that from one of my guests, I was like, oh Christ, yes, absolutely. Why are we not hearing more of that?
Yeah, I don't know. We need to. I was speaking to someone the last few days who is American, concerned about the demonization of Russians and Chinese, and looking at how to stop nuclear bombs and like big stuff. And he was asking me, how can we bring empathy? And and for me, it's all about storytelling. An enemy is someone whose story we haven't heard.
Yes.
And I believe we have the capacity to listen and empathize with everyone in the world. And not just that, we need to, we need to be able to do that. But there's this tendency to make other people, to blame people and make them the reason why we're struggling.
So maybe if we part that a little bit, I want to take the direction away from I could talk to you all day about this. Absolutely fascinating, and great respect for what you're doing. But in the lessons that you've learned in that theatre, that difficult environment, there's lessons in it for everybody, isn't there? We can take what you've learned and we can say, okay, in the workplace, in politics, anywhere really, we could apply that experience. Do you think? I think I know the answer to this, but have you tried that? Have you tried taking that learning into different places, different theatres?
Yeah, I've done some work in the business world, in the corporate world. I do a lot of work in schools with young people. So it's true everywhere. We always have conflict, and there is the human potential to demonize each other, to blame when we're hurting. And I'm not free of this. When I feel pain, my first thought is, who can I blame?
Yes.
But we can change that. And once we change that reflex, then a whole new world opens up to us. And it does not mean we have to accept people's behavior, which is negative, but there's a way to challenge it without making them wrong, without demonizing them. Because how do people change? They don't change because someone wags their finger and go, you're bad. No one changes that way, do they? Or if they do, it's only for the moment.
Yes. We seem to see a lot of that in the media just now, don't we? There's an awful lot of finger pointing and shaming and then self-flagellation, which I find very bizarre. But there is a lot of that in the media just now. So just before we go on, I want to ask you about your artifact and your favourite story, etc. But a couple of comments here I just wanted to bring to the fore. There's one from Gail Robertson, who's Chief Curiosity Officer. There's a job title, Gail. I love it. So this interview thanks to Gabe. I know who Gabe is.
Curiosity.
Yeah.
Like when we're curious, then there's a natural wish to understand and hear the story.
Yes.
And I had masses of curiosity, and I think it's really important.
Yes.
When we run out of feeling curious, then we might as well give up. It's like we have to be curious and interested and work to try and find those stories. Like the appalling catastrophe of the refugees who died last week. They've all got stories, and people then label them and stop being curious. And actually, that kind of certainty that we are right and we're not be curious leads to be able to hurt people.
Yes.
So curiosity is massively important.
Absolutely with you. I mean, regular listeners and watchers of the show will know that I actually see certainty as a serious counter, behaviour. If someone is certain, I start to worry about that person. And I don't know how you with as you get older, I'm less and less and less certain about anything nowadays, because I know. I mean, I remember in my youth. I mean, I was convinced that I was right, and I would struggle with anyone who didn't see the world through my lens, and I now realise what a plonker I was. But I still think that we have to help people see that, because I mean, it's things. My dad, and my poor dad gets this all the time from me on here. I mean, he is still convinced that his little town is the centre of the universe, and it is the centre of his universe. So it's got the best beer, it's got the best coffee, it's got the best food, it's got the best music, and I'm like, come on, get out. And it's one of the things I love about travel. You start to see the world is very complicated and very interesting and nuanced, and that being curious is wonderful. So thanks for that. And funny enough, one of the other comments we've got is from Derek Cheshire, who works in the innovation space. I know Derek. And he's saying, and he's a big advocate of curiosity as well, Joe. So he's saying, goosebumps galore, another brilliant episode. Well, thanks, Derek. I think you can thank my guests for that. Getting the goosebumps. I've had goosebumps as well, so that's quite good. And I've got another response here saying, what a powerful interview and a great way to start my day. Thanks, Gail. I take it you'll be Eastern Standard Time over there, 7:30 in the morning, I think, isn't it? So thanks for getting up so early. Thank you. So,
thank you.
One of the things that I'd like to move us to the sort of the core of this show, Joe, because I believe that we're obviously very much on the same place about storytelling, and I'm often asked about how do you do it, where do you start? And one of the ideas I had was, well, let's use artifacts. Let's let all the things behind me, everything behind me has got a story behind it. I mean, I'm doing public speaking online, or I'll take these onto the stage and I'll show them it and I'll tell them the story, and it really helps you because you don't need to remember it if you've got an artifact. It just all comes flooding back to you, doesn't it? So, what's your artifact? Did you bring something for us to have a look at?
Yes. I actually brought a picture of my dad.
Ah, right. Let's have a look.
Because, it's because of my love for him and gratitude for all that he gave me that has led now to a story that is changing people's lives. And obviously, I would rather my father hadn't been killed.
Yes.
Because of course. And I'm the one who's looking out on the top of the swing, squashing my poor little sister below. She's my twin. Anyway, so my brother. So I think it's because I've been accused of all sorts of things, not loving my father and betraying him, but going back to curiosity and I think Gail also mentioned kindness is the way to peace. What I've learned by transforming what's happened to me is incredible, and I'm actually grateful for the opportunities that I have to make a difference. And it started just that 2 days later by, I always see it as like we kind of have like a dagger sword in our hand and we want to pierce someone and hurt them, and that's revenge. But I put it in the ground and said, I may have no choice over what happened to me, but I have choice with how I respond. And to me, that's the first step in choosing to create a different future and changing the story. So one story is, yes, my father was killed in the most violent way, but I've changed the story. I'm still changing it. But I've met the man and I've empathized with him. We've gone to different parts of the world. I've had the most incredible experiences of the people I've met around the world. I have so much hope, and people go, how can you be so hopeful? It's the stories I've heard. People's the human capacity to transform what's happened to them is just phenomenal.
Have you kept those stories? Have you recorded them? Have you written them down?
I'm writing my book slowly.
Right, okay. Because it sounds to me like we could have a stencil for peace. You know, you could have something that you could demonstrate to people that, look, this works. This isn't just some, guru-led nonsense. This is a real person with a real experience who's met other people with that realness about them. So, wow.
Yeah.
Can I ask how your siblings have dealt with you and how you have taken that experience? Have they been similarly affected, or is it? Please don't. I don't wish to pry. I'm just, how has that developed?
They've all had a different experience. I think I was the only one who, the how it happened, the why was so important to me. For them, they were grieving their father, and for me, it was the big picture. So they haven't felt that.
Right.
But they all still speak to me, and we all meet up.
Right. Okay.
So I know I'm hard and challenging at times, but this isn't about, for me, always being, I suppose, liked or appreciated. Because this is an experiment, really. Can we change the future?
Yes.
And I think we can. And I think we do change it through sharing these stories. I mean, the feedback I get, because I use my story. I don't share my story because I need to. For me, it's where it lands.
Yeah.
And I'm a facilitator, so I then move into the audience. So if I'm with young people, if I'm in the business world or in prison or in post-conflict in Bosnia, it doesn't matter. There are individuals there who take the story into their own lives because they choose to, not because I tell them. I don't do 5-point, this is how you let go and forgive or build empathy. I kind of facilitate it so it comes from them in a kind of more organic way.
Yes. Right. Okay. There's I don't know if you know this quote, I'll put it on the screen, that, a story can act as an empathy engine.
Oh, my goodness.
That. Isn't that amazing?
Where did you find that?
I wish I'd thought of it. Chris Riddell, or Riddle as we'd call him in Scotland, he used to be the UK's children's laureate. And isn't that absolutely glorious? When I heard that, it was about, when was it? About maybe a year and a half ago, Joe. So I've not had it in my back pocket for years. And I heard it, and I sat there and I went, I've got to do a show. But that was actually the motivation behind this show, because I normally talk about the future of work, and science and technology, and I realised that, oh my God, there's maybe something here. And can I just say, you've given an exquisite supporting statement for that comment, because I could see the empathy in you. You can, even on this digital world, you sometimes don't, but absolutely gorgeous. I really appreciate you sharing that story and that artifact. So, what's your favourite story? What's the story that you think, oh wow, I've got to tell people this or share this?
Oh, so many. The one I'm going to share is actually a 16-year-old gal from the Muslim community in the East End of London.
Right.
And I was one of the things I do is these positive change maker courses. And if I can get into school, I used to be able to get into schools, I would be there for maybe a few months, going each week and build up the trust. And this young woman who was exceptionally bright, as they all were. It was a girls' school. Amazing young women. They all shared with me the impact of racism on their lives,
Right.
and they'd all had experiences. They all knew people, and they wanted to be heard. And I did loads and loads of listening, and I also said, as a white person, what's been done in my name, I'm really sorry about that. That's not okay. So I called it out, and after we got to the point of where they created their projects, and it wasn't my idea what they were going to do, it was their idea. And in the end, they worked on mental health in their school. Having started with the wars in the world, they went right back to the schoolroom, and they did an amazing project. And I sort of supported them in learning the skills that they needed to deliver the project. And one of these young women is one I'm thinking of. She came to me and she said, "This is the first time that a white person from your age and your background has listened to me, and not just listened, but believed in me and knows I have a powerful voice and I'm going to contribute to this world." Now, part of me thought, well, that's shocking that it hasn't happened before. And then the other part of me thought, wow, this is something that I take this so seriously, that she's trusted me enough to share her inner turmoil. And I can't even get the words of the privilege of that.
Yes.
And I care so much about my young people, because through my story, they get seen and heard. I don't know how that happens, And I've had a queue of young Black men all waiting to tell me the story of their traumas after my talk.
Really?
And also, I have the same response also in schools which aren't so diverse. But to create that trust is something which to me is the most amazing gift. And I just, it leaves me weeping in a sense of just how miraculous this is, and I can't wait to get back into my schools. I did do a little bit in spring, but then, it's difficult. But next year, I want to get back and run more of these programs of positive change makers, and loads of listening time for them to talk about what the last 2 years have been like, how they've been impacted. And the group that I did work with were doing projects of resilience and kindness. So it's back to kindness again. So, and that helped them feel better to create their own projects.
Wow. Well, if there's anything we can do here to help you with that, I'd be 100% willing to help you, because I think what you're doing is quite amazing. And I'm not alone in that, because just before we talk about how people can get in touch with you, this is from Jo. Right, Jo's one of the regulars on the show. She's a wonderful person. Until now, I was struggling with the negativity of others. Jo, you have provided me with a way of understanding where they are coming from and thoughts on how I deal with them in the future.
Wow.
Thank you. Blinking heck.
That's amazing. Well,
Isn't that lovely?
if you'd like a free one-to-one to be heard, because it sounds like you're going through a lot, then drop me a line. And is it okay to say next year I'm doing a very small course online for people who want to go through a process where they end up with their own gifts of transforming whatever they're going through. I'm calling it the gift of conflict. Or if anyone sees it, I can help in any way, then, do let me know. Because for me, this is the most humbling and the most, amazing work that I think can be done.
Right. Wow. So people can get in touch with you on this website about that sort of training and that sort of thing. And then the website that I spent more time on before this interview was your other one, which is about building bridges for peace.
Yeah, that's my charity.
Yeah, terrific website, and lots of information there about your experience and the things you've done since. Is there anybody else people can get in touch with you if they want to get in touch with you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Clubhouse.
Oh, you're there. You're all over it. Great. Well, that I have to say that has been a terrific. That's been 45 minutes already, Joe. That just flew by, and
wow.
I would so love to take you back and ask you about your experiences in those 400 talks, and how you went round the world sharing these messages. So maybe one day when you've got a gap between courses, you can come back on, because I think the work you're doing is extraordinary, and I have to say thank you ever so much for coming on the show. It's been a privilege to hear your story. I have to say thank you very, very much indeed. And
Oh, well, thank you. And I've given a lot more talks than that around the world, because
yeah,
most of what I do is not with Patrick McGee. I sort of do it on my own.
right,
So
okay, okay,
and I just want anyone who is listening and struggling, I really do believe in, my new favorite word is serendipity.
yeah,
I don't know what you think about that, but even
love
in
it.
these difficult times, which a lot of us are having, it's incredible the miracle of serendipity that can be there if we can,
Yeah,
see it. So
yes,
I've had some hard times, and the serendipity has been extraordinary.
mm-hmm.
And looking back on my life, this journey could not have happened without that element of serendipity that's
Yes.
been there.
I think one of my favourite stories, Joe, and serendipity definitely is part of it, was and it's quite sentimental, but you remember the old Robin Williams film, Dead Poets Society?
Oh, yes.
And he's talking to the boys about,
Mm.
you need to take the opportunity, and everybody knows Carpe Diem now, but I didn't back when I was a student. It was like, wow, and
Yeah.
we've never met. We don't know each other, do we? I mean, this has been a serendipitous experience for me. I don't know about you, but for me, it's like, oh gosh,
Totally.
thank goodness we met.
Thank goodness.
On here, and I think you're right, because and one of my one of the things I really struggle with, and people don't believe me, but I am really rubbish socially. I don't like it. I don't like going up to people and saying hello, but I force myself to do it, because I know that could be a new relationship, that could be a new friendship, that could change everything for me, and it's and for them, so yeah, absolutely 100%. See, there's two words you've used there. There's curiosity and serendipity. What a pairing! What a pairing! Maybe we need to do a show about luck, Joe. Maybe that's what we need to talk about sometime. Luck.
What is luck?
What is it? Yeah. So, well, look, it just remains for me to say thank you very, very much, and I genuinely mean it. And it's the empathy I have for what happened to you, more about the context. I know what it was like in terms of the creation of these wicked sites. That's what Tom Morley last week called it. False binaries. We don't need to be in these binaries, do we? We just don't need to take sides. It's not about sides. So thanks, Joe.
No, one last thing.
I'm happy. Yeah.
Our hearts have the capacity to hold different truths. So we don't need to take sides.
Yeah.
But our head's not so good at it, but our hearts can definitely do that. We can hear. I've empathized with people from all sorts of different sides. I work and I do restorative processes, and that's what I've learned to be able to do. We can do it. We don't need to. Yes. And if we do take one side, then we're immediately closing down, I believe, serendipity, curiosity, and the only way to combat the growing, hatred and demonization is through love. And love, I think, is sort of empathy in action.
Yeah. What a way to finish the show. What a way to finish the show. Thank you very much, Joe. And I really do hope that one day you and I can have a glass of wine and a long, long chat about this, because it's been a pleasure to have you on. Thanks.
I love that. I don't live too far from you, so we can do it.
Let's hope this Omicron nonsense goes away and we sort it out as quick as we can, because it'd be great to meet you. Great to meet you. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, my God, I've never cried on the show, but I'm that far away from it. It's bringing me all these memories back from my own youth, and I think it proves the power of story. So remember, one of the things I always say on the show at the end is this, that watch out for stories this week, as they could change the world. You've just seen somebody doing that, and I thought that was marvelous. So thanks very much for tuning in, folks. Next week, there might be a change of plans, so I'm not going to raise your expectations. And it's a personal thing, so I need to just deal with it. So I'll sort it next week. I'll let you know in the across the social media platforms what I'm going to do next week as soon as I can. The following week is sorted, but next week I'm still thinking about what we're going to do because it's quite complicated. So thanks very much for tuning in. I've also got something I wanted to tell you about because somebody asked me on the show about, and funny, Jo mentioned that she's on different platforms as well. So am I, but I've never really done anything just with voice only. And someone asked me or suggested to me that I should be thinking about doing a voice only show. I'm losing my bloody voice right now, so it might not work tomorrow, but I'm going to do it tomorrow. And I'm actually using the new Twitter platform to do it, called Spaces. I decided to do that rather than the other platforms like Clubhouse. Because I seem to have quite a large audience on Twitter. So tomorrow at noon UK time, I'm going to be talking about a hero for your journey, and this obviously comes from the classic, a hero's journey way of telling story. But one of the things that I've taken great help from in my life has been mentors. Some of them have been people I've actually known, but others have been people that I have read about and have watched and studied. And I'm going, this one, if Joe's still there, this won't surprise Joe. My favourite thinker in history is a chap called Carl Sagan. I can't even say his name. My kids are constantly saying, "Daddy, say Carl." I know I can't say it. Scottish accent. So tomorrow on Twitter at 12 o'clock, I'm going to be doing a voice only show about Sagan. And I'll share some of the reasons why he's one of my heroes on my journey. So I hope some of you might join me for that. But to repeat what I said a minute ago, keep an eye on things this week after the show, because this could be the week that you come up with something that could change the world. This has been Artefact Live, the art and science of storytelling, with me, Scott MacArthur, and my wonderful guest, Joe Berry. We'll see you sometime soon. Bye-bye.